On April 12, 1985, Michael Carroll and his girlfriend, 18-year-old Kathleen Allen, were staying together at a motel room in California. At around 10 p.m., Michael told Allen that he had something to do and would return the next morning. Michael was never seen again. 2 days later, Allen received a phone call from a stranger saying her boyfriend had been shot at Lake Tahoe, a freshwater lake located between the border of California and Nevada. A panic-stricken Allen made her way as fast as possible to Lake Tahoe in search of her boyfriend, but when she arrived, she discovered it was all a trap. Allen was taken to a safety bunker, and just like other women before her, she was bound, stripped of her clothes, and a camera was pointed at her. As she stared into the evil eyes of her captor, he told her, "If you don't go along with this, we're going to take you into the bed, tie you down, shoot you, and bury you." Hello and welcome back. If you didn't already know, Doomsday Preppers are people who are ready and well prepared for whatever horrors the apocalypse, or at the very least economic collapse, will bring them. But Leonard Lake and Charles Ng weren't your ordinary preppers. And the sick and twisted things that they did, well, you're not going to find it on National Geographic. Today's video is about Charles Ng and Leonard Lake, two friends who gave new meaning to the word torture. So buckle up, because this is gonna get bumpy. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button, so you'll have more of my amazing content injected into your feed. I'm your host, Greenland, and this is the Murder Encyclopedia. It's probably not shocking news that a lot of people think the world is on the brink of total and complete collapse, what with the pandemics, economic downturn, and rapidly changing climates. It's almost surprising the world hasn't ended yet. Well, it turns out that anticipating total societal collapse isn't a 21st century invention, and people have been preparing for it for decades now. Let's use these two stains on society as a case study. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, two men that weren't just terrible at doomsday prepping, they were more interested in snuffing out lives than surviving an apocalypse. Charles Ng was born on the 24th of December, 1960 in Hong Kong. As you can probably guess, he was abused by his father as a child. Charles wasn't the kind of person to ask nicely for things. No, he would simply steal them. This lovely habit got him expelled from multiple schools until he moved to the United States and eventually got him kicked out of the military. However, that was where he met his partner in crime, Leonard Lake. Together, they lived in a remote structure located in Sierra Nevada. Lake would describe this structure as a dungeon in his journals. And let me tell you, it lived up to the name. So who was this Leonard Lake? Well, he was a very disturbed human being.
What I want is an off-the-shelf sex partner. I want to be able to use a woman whenever and however I want.
At the age of 6, he was taking nude photos of his sisters and coercing them to perform sexual acts while he filmed them. Not very normal child behavior, yet his grandmother allegedly encouraged this behavior, and so he only grew more obsessed with making explicit content. He also liked to dissolve mice in chemicals. Lake enlisted into the Marines and served for a couple years before he was dismissed after having what they termed as a delusional breakdown. He was diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. Lake would go on to develop a fear of an impending apocalypse, and this fear would drive him to build a safety bunker, or his dungeon as he liked to call it, on a settlement north of Ukiah, California. That is where Lake and his longtime friend and fellow Marine discharged, Charles Ng, lived together. As you can probably guess, these very normal, well-adjusted men prepared for the end of the world in the most healthy way possible. Who am I kidding? Of course they didn't. Both men became soul brothers in their shared belief that the world was on the brink of a nuclear holocaust. They strongly believed that after the human race gets annihilated, they would be the only survivors charged with the task of repopulating the world with the aid of sex slaves. They even coined a name for this future plan, Operation Miranda. Sickeningly enough, Miranda was the name they gave every woman they managed to capture and victimize. From 1983 to 1985, both men rained terror on the residents of California, claiming the lives of over 20 people. They engaged in a similar pattern of sexual assault, torture, and murder. Their primary mode of operation was for Lake to pose as a photographer and to suggest to a female client that they should use the remote but beautiful landscape of Sierra Nevada as a backdrop. And when these women showed up to the remote location, sometimes with their friends, boyfriends, or children hoping to enjoy a nice photo session, they would go to any length to isolate their Miranda victim, killing friends, husbands, children, you name it. The whole point was to completely break their female target until she essentially became a sex robot. Leonard Lake's first victims were his brother and his best friend, in case you thought he was in any way redeemable. He killed his best friend who, might I add, was the best man at his wedding, so he could steal his identity and cash in his government checks. As for his brother, well, Lake just didn't like him. Lake and Ng's next victims were an entire family. Harvey and Deborah Dubs and their 1-year-old infant Sean. The family had just put in an advertisement for their business when Lake and Ing knocked on their door. Excited for a potential customer, they rushed to the door and opened it, only to be met with a gun to their faces. Harvey Dubs tried to defend himself, but he was shot in the head. Sean was also shot and the infant died instantly, while Deborah was strangled to death. Ing managed to pack their bodies into a large duffel bag, and while he pulled the bags downstairs, a suspicious neighbor accosted him and he fled, jumping into the truck Lake was driving. Ing returned many days after the murder to sweep the scene clean of the Dubs' possessions because, he's a thief. He just loves stealing. There were many more murders to come. Too many to fully detail, to be honest. The most spine-chilling murder, though, is probably what they did to 18-year-old Kathleen Allen. On April 14th, 1985, following the disappearance of one Michael Carroll, Kathleen Allen received a phone call from an unidentified caller who stated that her boyfriend Michael, who had been reported missing for 2 days, had been found, but not in great condition. Allen took a leave of absence, informing her boss that she had to go be with her boyfriend. She was last seen leaving in a brown car with a bearded man who would later be identified as Leonard Lake. She was taken to his dungeon and put through hell. One tape depicted Allen bound to a chair with handcuffs, her face looking numb, probably due to a state of shock. From behind the camera, you could hear the spine-chilling voice of Lake. If you don't agree this evening, right now, to cooperate with us, we'll probably put a round through your head and take you out and bury you in the same area we buried Mike. Subsequent footage and documentation in a journal would uncover the horrors that Allen was put through before she was finally released from her mortal coil. They had strangled her using a rope, overpowered her, and sexually assaulted her, then tortured her using a butterfly knife to cut her skin. Her screams and calls for help could be heard in the final footage before it all ended. A few days later, the duo would descend upon their next victims, the Bonds family. They would kill Lonnie Bond Sr., his 1-year-old infant Lonnie Bond Jr., and his friend Robin Stapley with a gun at close range. They subjected Lonnie's girlfriend, Brenda O'Connor, to days of abuse, rape, and torture. She was bound to a chair like Allen, her mouth gagged with a cloth. Video footage showed Ing tearing off her blouse with a butterfly knife, while Lake bragged about killing her whole family in the background. The pair were great at covering up their tracks by dissolving the bodies of their victims and burying them in shallow graves around their home. They stole their victims' possessions and made sure not to leave any lingering evidence that could link them back to them. This sadistic pair managed to get away with the murders for so long, until they met their downfall committing the most mundane crime yet. So what led to their downfall? Well, on the 2nd of June, 1985, Ing was caught shoplifting from a hardware store in South San Francisco. He fled the scene on foot, throwing the stolen item into the trunk of their brown Honda Lake and ran away. Lake attempted to pay for the stolen item, but it was too late. The police had already arrived. They asked for a photo ID, and while going through them, they found out that Lake bore no resemblance to the photo of his driver's license. Instead, it was the license of a man named Robin Stapley, a San Diego resident who had been reported missing for months. They searched further and found a gun equipped with a prohibited silencer in the trunk of his car. He was then taken into custody for questioning. At the station, Lake was placed into an interrogation room where he was given a pen, paper, and a glass of water. A short time later, a detective entered the room and found Lake violently convulsing on the floor. On the notepad was a brief suicide note. At the hospital, it was determined that Lake had swallowed cyanide pills that he had sewn into his clothes. He never regained consciousness, and 4 days later, died on the 6th of June. A search was carried out in his home where they uncovered the dungeon of death and the images of horror that lay in there. They discovered a makeshift burial site nearby and managed to unearth over 40 pounds of burned and crushed human bone fragments that accounted for a minimum of 11 bodies. They found the video footage, journals, and a particular tape over 20 minutes long where he elaborated on his plan to make a sex slave business ring. It goes without saying, this was a pretty terrible doomsday shelter. It was pretty much just a dungeon. Ing managed to escape US law enforcement by fleeing to Canada where he stayed under the radar. It was on the 6th of July, 1985 when he was caught shoplifting again by a guard when he got arrested by Canadian officials. In 1991, he was extradited to California where he was indicted on 12 counts of first-degree murder. He maintained that he was merely an observer amid all the murders and crimes, despite the gruesome video evidence that clearly said otherwise. In February 1999, he was convicted of 11 of the 12 murders and was sentenced to death. While Charles and Lake loved to prey on women, another serial killer, Eileen Warnos, did the opposite. Check out my video on her spine-chilling story. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from, here at the Murder Encyclopedia.